Hey everyone, you are in the right place. It is Tuesday, and thank you for choosing to listen to this episode of the How to Life podcast. I'm Dr. Laura Jaggett, and this is episode 99. That is crazy to me. 99 episodes of really great content about life skills and how to develop as a person so that you can offer the world the best version of yourself. I'm ending the double digits of my podcast episodes with a life skill topic. Episode 99 is all about credit cards. This is another one of my no fear episodes because we are going to break down the concept of credit cards, explain their many benefits, really highlight the potential downside, explain how and why so many people get into credit card debt and how you can avoid that. It really just comes down to understanding how this tool works. That's right. That's what it is. Credit cards are tools. And who better to explain this than Reid Garcia? Remember Reid? I interviewed him back in episode 46, talking about how to prep your kitchen so that you can feed yourself, which is another huge life skill. On that show, he summarized his course, Kickstart Your Kitchen, which catered, which caters to the beginner all the way to the advanced cook as well. I did not intend that little joke there. Catered. That's funny. Anyway, Reid is the founder of Helpful for Life, and he also teaches life skills that you may have missed earlier in your life. We all have some holes in our adulting arsenal, and I think that Reid and I make a pretty good team in helping to fill some of those. He is here today to talk about his latest helpful creation called Swipe Right, the comprehensive guide to getting the most out of your credit card use. So let's get into it and unravel the mystery of credit cards. Welcome back to the How to Life podcast, Reid. It is so good to see you, and I'm so happy you're here again.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having us. I mean, with kindred spirits like us, How to Life, Helpful for Life, I think we should talk often.
We really should, because you have a lot of information I don't, and there's so much more out there that people have questions about. I think between the two of us, we can really give people some clarity in this world.
Oh, I completely agree.
All right. Today's topic was one that scared me for a long time, and I'm still pretty cautious of it. It's about credit cards. And I know that there are a lot of people out there that don't know exactly what it is, or they think it's some free money. And so they're happy to get one, and then they're just spending like there's no tomorrow. So I would love for you to educate us about credit cards, and you've made a guide. So tell us about that guide.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you asked about credit cards because regardless of where you are in life or how rich or poor you are, there's two things that follow you pretty much everywhere. And they're two things that a lot of people get wrong, especially here in America, and that is finances and food. And you have a very astute eye because the two things you've brought me on to talk about so far were food with our course, Kickstart Your Kitchen earlier, and now finances with Swipe Right, the comprehensive credit card guide. So with Swipe Right, basically our goal was to figure out what are the different paths that people might be on right now with their credit. Some people have never even heard of a credit card. They don't know what credit is. They don't know the point. But then there's the opposite side of people. It's like, oh, my mom got me a credit card when I was 13 and I have perfect credit and I've never had debt. And you know what? I actually make $2,000 a year on credit card points or whatever. And within the guide, we cover both of those situations and everywhere in between. So regardless of how little or how much you are educated on this topic, the guide's goal is to make it easy for you to figure out what you need. And there's infographics, and we also have calculators on our website to help you figure things out. It's like one from the very beginning of like, what is credit, to the far end of, hey, how do I take advantage of a sign-up bonus? How do I know when to spend my points versus using money? And so many other things.
So from this intro, I'm pretty sure everybody's thinking, I need to get that guide. And yes, you need to get that guide. So this interview is going to be kind of a summary, and we're going to hit just a few kind of highlights that people ask about. So let's start from the beginning. You mentioned something about, I'm 13 years old and my mom got me a credit card. Or maybe more correctly would be my mom gave me a card that is attached to her credit. And I did an interview once about how to repair your credit if you get into trouble. One of them is if you have a parent who has excellent credit, that's a great way to build your credit. You are attached to your parents' credit. Conversely, if they have terrible credit, then you also will have terrible credit. But that is one way to get started, correct?
Yes, it is. Building your credit using a parent or somebody else is a great way to build your credit. And what that does is you basically, the whole thing about credit is the banks and the financial institutions want to know, hey, if we give you money now, how do we know we're going to get it back? And so you have something called a credit score, which basically says the higher that score is, the more likely it is that you're going to pay them their money back. And as they lend you money, they say, hey, we're going to give you, say, $100 right now so you can buy that thing. But when you pay us back, you're going to pay us a little bit more to make it worth the risk it is for us to give you that money. And the lower your score is, the more you're going to have to pay because you are riskier to them. And that's why over time, as you build better credit, you get a better score. You can get things like 0% interest rate and great sign-on bonuses because those companies know if they're spending money with me, I can make a lot of money off of them. So one way to build that score from either nothing or low to something higher is to work with somebody who already has a higher score. And they're like, hey, we don't know anything about you, but we know a lot about your mom or your dad, or maybe just an interested friend who's willing to help you out. And they can be on a credit card with you. So that way, if you mess up, they know that that other person can come in and help you. But whoever is helping you with that, it's also putting their credit at risk. And so there are some times where this isn't something I would advise for certain relationships, especially because if you are pretty sure you're going to mess up hard at some point, or you are doing it with someone who's really spiteful and they might like hold it against you forever, that's one way to kind of amplify things. But if you're in a good relationship with the person and you pay attention and you follow a lot of the rules in our guide, you'll be just fine.
How do credit cards make money?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are multiple ways credit cards companies can make money off of you. And one of the ways is every single time you swipe it, they're making money, not necessarily off of you, but mostly off of the merchant or the vendor. And so that's why anytime you go to the grocery store, for example, or the ATM, or anytime you literally swipe your piece of plastic somewhere, somebody is getting paid. And that is how they make their money. And that's why these companies are willing to give things like 0% interest and lots of free points to people they know who are going to pay them back and are going to spend a lot of money, because they're getting something like 2.5% off of every transaction. So if Joe Bob is spending $100,000 a year, even though he's paying off his credit card every month, he's not paying anything in interest. The credit card company is still making that 2.5% off of all of his purchases. And then another way they make money is on that interest, like we were talking about earlier. And so if you are not paying off your credit card in full every month, that is when they start to charge you interest. And interest can get complicated real fast. And there's something called compounding interest, which can make that $100 purchase turn into something way much more if you don't pay it off fast enough. And we go into some of the math, and we have some calculators and some graphs to help show that on our website as well. Another way they make money is by things like late fees and registration fees, application fees, and things like that. And one of the things that kind of stinks about the system is the less money you have and the less credit you have, the more money they're going to make off of you in the fees and the interest. That's a handful of the main ways that credit cards make money.
So I want to be clear, and I want to break it down for the very newbie here who's trying to understand all of this. When you get a credit card, it's nice. You want to buy something and you don't have the money for it at the moment. And you're like, oh, I have a credit card. They've extended me a certain amount of money that's enough to cover this purchase I want. So if you just say, oh, I'll just put it on my credit card and worry about it later without having a plan to pay it back, that's how you get in trouble, because you do not make the payment on the payment deadline. Interest is charged, and now you have to pay what you bought, the principal, in addition to the interest. Then if you don't make that full the next month, That is what the compounding interest is. And you start snowballing, and that's how people get into trouble. I've talked about this on my couple of finance episodes I've done about investing and compound interest. You make money and it snowballs when you make money. Works the same way with debt. You snowball into debt. So Reid, APR is the percentage that the credit cards charge you. Can you explain how that can cause someone to get into trouble? Because I don't think many people even pay attention to that.
So APR is something called the annual percentage rate, and that's related to interest. And the biggest thing about interest is there's a difference between what's called simple interest, which is just, for example, say I loaned you $100 and say it's 5% interest. Well, when you pay it back to me, it would be 100 times 5%, which would be $5 extra. So you would end up paying me $105. Well, there's something called compounding interest, and that is where there's interest on your interest. And so instead of it being just 5%, it could be 5% that's compounded monthly or compounded annually or compounded daily. And what that means is there's a period of time. So let's say it's compounded daily. That means every day the math is done and it says, on this balance plus that interest, you're going to have interest done on it. And so because of that, that causes things to cost a lot more money, a lot faster. And we have a whole section on this in the guide called APR Explained in Detail. But when you play around with the calculators a little bit, you can see just what those numbers look like.
Right. That's a good example you just gave. Like $100 is easy. Let's say it's 5%. You don't pay that $100 back on time, you now owe $105. And if you don't pay that $105 back on time the next day or the next week or whenever that rate is going to be calculated, it's going to add 5% of 105
It'll be a little bit more,
and it just keeps going. So these credit cards are often very high, like 25%, 35%. So if you take that $100 example, you don't pay your $100 payment back on time, you now owe $135. And that's how people get into credit card debt. That's how you get into trouble.
Right. And then you're like, oh, well, I can afford to pay the 130, but I can't afford to pay the extra couple of dollars because I wasn't aware of that. And again, as we talked about, credit card companies are trying to make money off of you. The earlier you know that and the more earlier you're aware of that, the easier it'll make your life. Because guess what? The type of compounding that they often use that daily compounding, meaning it's going to cost you the most money. And another thing that they do is they'll actually charge you interest between when the charge happens and the billing period's over. So if you made a charge on day 10 of a billing period, you know that they can charge you interest for the 20 days left in that billing period. And so there's a lot of little sneaky ways that these credit card companies make money off of you. So the more you're aware of what they're doing, the more you can plan and say, okay, you know what? I'm willing to accept these extra charges, but I don't want those extra charges. So I'm going to plan accordingly.
And this is if you don't pay your payment on time. This is where all these little charges. But if you pay your payment on time, you'll be okay. You don't have to fear.
Yes.
You don't have
to
fear
add one caveat to that. If you are paying your balance in full every month, then you would not be charged interest. But another common thing, another term you should know is the minimum payment. And let's say I'm carrying a balance of $1,000 on my credit card. Well, there's going to be some minimum payment that I have to pay every month. Well, let's say it's $100. Well, if I only pay that $100, then they're going to charge me interest on the remaining $900. And so that is the part where they start to charge you all that interest and it adds up really fast. And that's where, I really encourage you to look at the calculator on our website, because you can type in some numbers and make up some examples or use the ones that are exact from yours. And you can see just how fast those things can add up. Anytime you're dealing with money, it's very much a psychological thing. And a lot of it is about how well you can control yourself. What is your self-control like? And the nice thing about credit cards, they're kind of like any tool, or I kind of like to think of like a knife. Knives are very sharp and they're very dangerous, but if you use them well and in the right context, they can do a lot of really good things. However, you can also hurt yourself if you're not careful. So credit cards are the same exact thing. The only difference between a credit card and a knife is that credit card mistakes can follow you around for years and years and years and years, whereas a cutting in your finger while you're cooking won't last that long. So it's important for you to educate yourselves and know a little bit about it. And that's what this guide is for. It's about making an easy way for you to understand these things. So as you're making these decisions now, you can set future self up for success. And that's one of the things I always like to think about. I'm like, okay, present Reid, he wants that big shiny object or whatever. And yeah, he really wants it. But what would future Reid think about this? And also, will future Reid be able to pay for this? And what are the impacts and things like that? So that's one little small mind experiment I like to do when I'm about to do something, especially if it's somewhat impulsive, especially if I probably know it's not the right thing. But sometimes I'm like, hey, you know what? It's worth it. And I'm willing to use the tool of debt in order to do the thing that I want to do or achieve the thing that I'm trying to achieve.
And you also look at it that it is a short-term debt. You're willing to get into debt for a period of time in order to accomplish something else, but you have a plan to stop that debt at a certain time.
Yes, exactly. And, my biggest advice for people who are first getting into credit cards is to not use them for their credit aspect at all. Just treat them like they're a debit card, where you use them like you would a debit card, but then you pay off the balance in full every month. And this is my advice pretty much to everyone. I know that's not a reality for everyone, and sometimes you do need to use that credit aspect, but I would encourage people to approach it first like that, and then occasionally dip into the credit for emergencies maybe, or things where it's like, this is the exception, not the rule. Mm-hmm. Because what happens is people start to use it, they get that power, and then they start building the debt, and then they need to be paying off that debt, and then they have more expenses, and it just grows and grows and grows, kind of like that snowball you're talking about. And so with credit cards is, if you know that's going to be a problem for you, we'll set your limit really low. Maybe you set your limit to be just $100 or something like that. And you just start using your credit card for like one thing. So maybe you start to buy your gas with it, or maybe your groceries, and you only use your credit card for that. And that way you can start to build your credit, but still being able to safely pay it off without having to worry about the risk of not paying things off and the cost.
You get this false sense of security, though. It's like, oh, I'm going to put my credit card. And then you forget that you bought lunch for everybody until next month and the bill comes and you had not saved that money. My father always said, if you don't have the cash to pay for it now, don't get it. Just save up. If you really want it, you will get it eventually if you make a plan.
Yeah. And going back to the psychological aspect of it, especially in today's day and age where we're largely in a cashless society, there's not the psychological connection to, it took me 3 seconds to pull this out and swipe it through the thing, or maybe even faster because I just tapped it with my phone. There's no concept of, I just gave something away. Yeah. And another way to put it is, that was 4 hours of work I had to do to pay that. And so these are some of the things that I like to think about. Is it worth me working 6 hours to pay for that group dinner that we had? And sometimes the answer is yes. And sometimes the answer is, probably not. And so having those different kind of psychological views on it can help a lot. And one financial strategy that I recommend for people who are really worried about themselves and they don't think they have the control and things like that, it's called the cash envelope method. And I may be messing up the name, but basically what you do is every week you say, okay, I'm going to allow myself to spend $50 on groceries. I'm going to allow myself to spend $10 on things that are just fun for me, et cetera, et cetera. You just give yourself the categories and the amounts. And then you go to the ATM, you get exactly that amount of money out, and you put it into literal paper envelopes. And for those of you who are under 20, envelopes are things you use to send mail. And mail is a thing that goes to physical addresses.
You have to get a stamp. You have to write things on it. It's very involved.
Yes, it is. But so you have these paper envelopes that contain your money. And then throughout the week, when you go to buy the thing, you pull out the cash. And by having to physically pull it out and see, hey, I started out with a stack like this, and that stack is visually getting smaller. Then it starts you having to make those choices a little more. And you're like, I don't know if I want to do that. And especially with some things like, I can't really do much with $10 a month for special. I mean, what am I going to get myself for $10 that I really like? Well, then it's like, hey, maybe if I save this till next week, it'll be more and then more. And then, you know what? Next month, I could be able to afford that video game that I really want. And so for someone who is like brand new into the world of trying to manage your finances, this is a way for you to get around it. And like, it's right in front of you. You can see how much you're spending, how much you're going over, all those types of things in a very physical, visual way. And then over time, I would say some people can graduate towards the more just digital after you've kind of started training yourself that way. But some people, that's all they do forever because it works.
Yeah. You made a very good point. It's not real when you just tap your card on the screen and, oh, you have it. No money was exchanged for this item. It's almost like they just gave it to me. So for those of you young ones who didn't grow up with the cash world that we did, you can do the same thing, but you make a budget. You're watching your account. You're watching what's coming in and out. I did another episode on that, which I will link in the show notes. But yes, it's the psychological aspect of it. And it is also learning how to create a budget to manage your credit card charges. Reid, I want to ask you this question. Let's say somebody's like, oh, I've got my finances under control. I never spend more than what I make. Does one need a credit card anyway?
So the thing about the credit system is, regardless of whether or not you want to participate in it, you are. And that's a thing that a lot of people don't realize is credit is something that you need to work in this world. And you can decide to not do it, but it'll just make a lot of things harder. And some of the biggest things that credit cards are used for is any purchase you're going to make that is bigger than an amount that you're going to pay right now. And so some of the most common examples are a car, an automobile of sorts, and a house. Those are two purchases that are very often sold on credit. Another thing that credit is used for is getting an apartment or renting a house. Whenever you go to apply, because guess what? They don't just let anybody rent a house or an apartment. You have to show them that you will pay your stuff and you will not destroy their apartment or whatever it is that you're renting. And so they will run a check against your credit. And guess what? Like I said, you have a credit file, whether or not you think about it or whether or not you pay attention to it. Same kind of thing with the internet. Whether or not you want to be on the internet, you are probably on the internet some way. And so my advice for that is the same as it is with finances. You're going to be there anyway. So why not control the narrative and help make yourself look better? And so one way to do that is to build your credit. Now, how much you use the credit cards, that's the part where it's kind of up to you. But you need to have at least some sort of credit card. And I would encourage you to have some sort of activity on it just to prove like, hey, I am a person who can responsibly borrow money from somebody and pay it back over time. And so that's why I encourage people to start as young as possible. And if you're below 18, I would encourage you to get a parent, guardian, or a friend to co-sign with you. And it literally can be $5 a month. And sure, I think the more money you spend and pay back, maybe that will give you a couple extra points or whatnot, but don't worry about that. If you're starting young and you're building your credit over time, it's going to get your score up, no problem.
I want to ask you this question. There's theories out there that you should pay off 70% of your card and carry like a 30% balance to leverage that for some reason. I don't ever do that. Okay. I pay everything off always, but
yes,
what are your
I'm
thoughts
glad you asked that because that is something that is a little bit confusing. So an important thing to remember about credit is credit only matters when you're trying to use it. So for example, if you're trying to get a mortgage so you can buy a house, that is when they're going to check your credit. And when they check your credit, one of the things they look at is what's called utilization. And that says, okay, we are lending Reid between all of his credit cards. He has $100,000 of possible credit card debt he could go into. That's what he could extend to. How much of that $100,000 is he using right now? And the 30% number, which is a rule you hear sometimes online, is kind of a standard of, hey, if you have a 30% utilization, like that's best for your credit or whatever. Now, the reason they say that is because if you're going above that, then the credit cards companies say, hey, he's already using a lot of his credit. Like, do we really want to give him more? Because he might just start spending more and more money and no longer be able to pay things back. But if it's all the way down at zero, they're like, oh, well, why he's not even using his money? Like, why should we give him more?
He has no track record.
Right. But the big mistake with utilization is that it's a snapshot in time that matters. And so even though I pay off my credit cards every month, when I'm applying for that house, they will look and see what the balances are on all of my credit lines. And those balances are just taken at whatever day that is. And so I'll have a balance technically on that card, but I'm going to pay it off at the end of the month anyways. So I already have some natural utilization that exists. You don't need to not pay off your card for that. do not get caught up in optimizing for your credit score, and don't try looking at your credit score like every day, every week. Like it's a number where you can set up some ways for you to get better using our guide. And then you can check it every so often, like maybe once a month, every couple months. And, if you have like a more intense problem or that you're trying to fix or remedy, then maybe it's worth you looking at more often. But if you're just trying to build credit, like you don't need to be looking at it all the time. But it is worth scheduling at least one time a year where you check in. And that's as easy as setting a recurring calendar invite to yourself. Hey, every first Saturday in February, have 2 hours where I sit down and do all my finances. And then that way you make sure they get done, instead of what most people do is they say, oh, someday I'll do it. And then it never happens because it didn't get scheduled.
So having a credit card is a great way to affect your credit. I was going to say improve your credit, but you could really make it worse.
You could make it worse as well.
It is a way to affect your credit. And that is how people know how responsible and how trustworthy you are.
Yes, like it or not. And again, Swipe Right, the guide is to help you figure out all of these situations. And of course, you guys can ask whatever questions you have and we'll gladly answer them.
Yeah. So that was a few pros of having a credit card. Also, there are incentives, cashback incentives, travel point incentives, all kinds of incentives if you do get a credit card. Yes?
Yes. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that is some of the other benefits of having a credit card, is to take advantage of the rewards that they give you, and also some of the protection, and also some of the additional features and benefits. And the additional features and benefits is what I'll start with, because most people, even people who've had credit cards their whole life, they forget about these things. Because guess what? The credit card companies, they advertise them so they can say, hey, we have all these things, come use them. It's kind of like a lifetime return policy. It's something that's really good, but most people don't think about actually doing, because it takes a little bit of work to take advantage of. And so some of those things are the manufacturer warranty. Say I buy a piece of electronics or something and it has a 1-year warranty, but then it craps out after a year and a half. Well, a lot of times if you bought that on this special credit card, you could do it up to 3 years or something like that. And there's other things like you get luggage for free, you get rental car insurance for free. There is all of these small extra benefits that you can see and read about whenever you're getting the card and use them.
Cashback, I mean, depending on what your situation is, you can find a card that can sort of maximize. If you travel for work or whatever, and you use a travel business card, you can get, what are they called? The lounges. Lounges could be access included.
Yeah.
Hotel, you earn points for every time you spend money on this card.
Right.
I know my parents, they shop at Sam's Club, or like one of the warehouse clubs. So membership is included. Gas prices are cheaper. You get double points if you buy from them. So depending on what you want, you can really maximize and benefit from the rewards.
Yeah. So another way to think about credit cards is kind of like gyms. You can go to a gym and you can pay $10 a month. But as you go to more premium and premium gyms, they have a lot more offerings. And sometimes those come with higher annual fees, which is something we haven't talked about yet. But there are plenty of cards you can get that will not have an annual fee. However, there are plenty of cards that come with the annual fee, which is basically a way of saying once a year, we're going to charge you a certain amount, say $50, $100, sometimes like $500, in order for you to have this card. And that's one of their ways they make sure they make enough money to pay for the services they're giving you. And when you get, especially in the higher end cards, it's kind of like the nicer gyms, you have all these amenities you can use. And the reality is most people don't use them. And that's why they can afford to offer them to you.
Right.
But if you do use them and you do take advantage of them, you can get much more value than you're actually paying for. For example, one of the cards I have allows you to get free deliveries on DoorDash. It gives you a discount on Uber. It has all of these things where they've made deals with these other companies. They're going to be making money off of you. So in my mind, like, how do we figure out the best way for you to make money while you're doing it? And so by doing things like the sign up bonus, taking advantage of your points, you can use shopping portals that they have that give you access to special deals and also promotions where if you buy something from Apple during this 1 month, your points will be worth 50% more. And so there are some people who they get way, way into this. And like, it's almost like a part-time job where they can figure out the best ways to make money. And it's like, oh, I just went on a trip to Europe and back, and I paid only $5 because they
went first class. That's right.
And they went first class. Yeah. So that's kind of like the far end of, actual optimization, right?
It's the opposite of extreme couponing.
Yes. Yeah. And for me, that's a lot more work than I want to do. But for people who want to get into that, that's fine. And the nice thing is I like to listen to the people who do that, grab a couple of the good tips, and then I accept that, you know what, I'm not getting all of the possible value I can, but the value I'm getting is good enough.
Agreed. All right. How do you even get a credit card? I think these days they're just mailing them out to everybody, like young people seeing who will bite.
So how you get a credit card is one, yes, people will send you unsolicited offers, and they will do that based off of your credit score. When you're looking at credit scores, there's two things. This is a little bit advanced, so don't worry too much if this is over your head, but there's what's called a soft inquiry and a hard inquiry. And a hard inquiry is like when I go to buy a car, I go to sign up for an apartment, I want to get a new credit card, people will check my credit. And when they go and check that credit, that's called a hard inquiry. And that actually dings your credit score a little bit because it says, oh, Reid's looking to get some money. Be aware. So if Reid goes and does all these requests all at once, there's kind of a flag. So that's one of the reasons why it dings your score, but only temporarily. Now, the soft inquiries are what these credit card companies are doing all the time. They're saying, hey, we're just kind of peeking at Reid's score and his history. We're not going real deep. So that doesn't affect my score. But by them peeking at my score, they can say, hey, that looks like a good candidate for someone who we can maybe make money off of. So then they send me a card or they send me an email or an ad or whatnot to get me to try and sign up. So that's all with the credit cards targeting us. Now, you as a consumer can also intelligently go and try and get one yourself. And if it's your first one, an easy way is to just go with the bank that you're already working with. And you can talk to a person at the bank and say, hey, I'm trying to get set up on a credit card. Can you set it up for me to where it'll pay off my balance every month using my checking account? Like you can work with someone and they can also help answer your questions. One thing I strongly encourage people, start interacting with people and experts who know these things more instead of trying to figure it all out yourself. At the very least, use some guides and stuff like we're sharing you, but don't be afraid to ask people whose job it is. They know all of this stuff. Leverage the experts who do that thing.
Is there a credit card in particular that is better for younger people?
So I'm not going to give any specific credit card recommendations today, especially because the right or the best credit card changes basically every month or every year. And within the guide, I have some resources of places that I recommend to look at and to browse credit cards. So that's what I would point people to, is to look in the guide and go to those sites. Because another thing about credit cards is the people and companies who are recommending credit cards to you, they're also making money, which makes it a little bit biased sometimes. And so that's a big thing to be aware of. So in our guide, we talk about some sites you can do that don't do that type of thing. And they can help you choose, like, you know, I spend a lot on groceries, or I spend a lot on travel, or whatever your categories may be. Between our guide and these sites, you can find the card that you need. And the other thing too is, don't worry about finding the perfect card. The main thing is to get a card and to start paying off your stuff on time, ideally in full, but at least making the minimum payments, because those are all green lights. Those are all good signs. And so you can see your scorecard over time. And so can every other company, every other apartment, every other house, all these types of things.
Yeah. You can really, it's the knife analogy again. You can really help yourself out, or you can really wound yourself. So we talked about the pros of credit cards. What are, other than, obviously getting in debt, are there any other cons of having a credit card or having too many credit cards?
Yes. So let's talk first about having too many credit cards, because that's one thing that I feel like a lot of people are afraid of. And actually, if you're strictly looking at credit and maximizing your credit score and trying to get more rewards and things like that, the system's actually set up to incentivize you to get more credit cards. Obviously, if you're someone who struggles with self-control and is worried about paying things off, then that's a very bad idea. So I don't know if I've said it yet, but a very important piece of advice from today, that if you hear nothing else, hear this. Know that different people in different situations will have different things that are right for their situation, whether or not we're talking about credit cards or many other things, right? So don't listen and be like, oh, well, Reid said I should maximize my credit card points. That's the most important. Like, no, maybe for you, it's just, hey, get some sort of minimum payment, build your credit, things like that. But anyways, I digress. Some of the other downsides of credit cards are, one, we talked about the psychological ease of paying for something. That's a really big downside of it. Another downside of it is having to make sure you avoid fees and things like that. But really, off the top of my head, I'm not coming up with a lot of downsides, especially because most of the downsides, like as long as you're aware of them and you plan for them, you can dodge them. And that's, again, that's what the guide is supposed to help you do. But assuming you have the self-control to at least set up the restrictions you need to use a credit card how you should, and assuming you successfully pay it off as you want to and as you plan to every month, then I recommend to most people that do pass both of those things to use your credit card as your daily driver. Now, the other thing about this plan and any plan is if you realize you're deviating from the plan and it's causing you problems, stop the plan.
Yes.
If you have a month or you have 2 months where it's not going to plan, then stop. Put the credit card in a closet. You can call and say, hey, don't let me charge this thing anymore.
You can also freeze it online. Like you can also freeze it online and just say, don't allow any spending. So you know a lot about credit cards. Did you ever get into trouble personally with credit card debt?
No. So personally, I have had a great credit history, and a lot of that's come from, me being born into a great financial situation. I've never actually been in debt my entire life, which is a very nice thing to say, a very privileged thing to say. And I recognize that. But I also recognize debt is a tool that needs to be used sometimes, and sometimes you don't have a choice. But then there's also times where you can make that choice, and it's like, hey, you know what? This is going to cost me more money, but it's a tool that I need to use right now to enable me to do what I want to do, what I need to do, or to get to this other part of my life that I want to get to. So I don't want to discourage people from going into debt or using credit cards. I just want people to make sure they're aware of what they're getting into. And so that's why, for example, with one of our calculators, you can see, okay, pay off a single credit card, and you can type in the numbers specific to your credit card that you either already have or that you're looking at. And then you can see easily, this is how much extra money I'm paying. Like, okay, if I'm going to have to buy this thing for $100 today, well, by the time I pay it off at the rate I'm thinking, that's going to end up costing me an extra $20. Is it worth it for me? And sometimes the answer will be yes. And sometimes the answer might be no. And so that's the big thing. It's very individualized, but that's why my general advice is to get the credit card. So for me, since I didn't fall into those negative traps and into the debt and things like that, that's where a lot of my personal experience has been more in the taking advantage of rewards and signing up for a new credit card and getting a bonus. And for those who are in the similar type of boat, if you want to get into the far end, there's something called churning, churning, churning. And there's a whole subreddit on it if this interests you, but that's people who are basically applying for new cards all the time. Because when you apply for a new card, you get a new bonus, you get extra bonuses, and then you end up with a toolbox of all your bonuses. And you say, hey, it's best for me to buy my groceries with this card, my flights with this card, my gasoline with this card, and all these different systems you can set up to where people make hundreds or thousands of dollars a year by maximizing the systems. And for some people, it's kind of like a puzzle. It's kind of like a game. For me, I don't enjoy that too much. So I kind of do a little bit less than that. I get a new card every couple years, and then that's basically it for me.
Reid, I'm glad that you brought up that you were raised by fiscally responsible parents and they taught you, and you yourself have lived that way. I know that most people aren't like that. So I will tell another story, and this is a true story. When I started my business 30 plus years ago, we took out loans, and we had tried a few other things which we shouldn't have. We used credit cards to buy product and then try to sell it. And that, we got in trouble with that. And then there are credit cards that say, hey, transfer the balance from one card onto ours for free. And so we would just do that. We dug ourselves in a hole of about $33,000. And this was while we were starting a new business. God, we had debt for it took 5 years to dig out. It was extremely stressful. Everything we made was just going to pay off our business loan and our credit card loans and our house loan. Yes, I learned a lesson. Yes, when we finally did dig out after 5 years, we were so used to giving everything away that when everything was paid off, we had all this money just fall on us. Yes, that was fun, but that one moment of fun was not worth the 5 years of trudging and digging out.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that story, because one of the biggest things that I'm trying to do with our company, Helpful for Life, is help collect stories like this, where it's like, hey, we did this thing in our life and we had some good things that came out of it. But if we could do it differently, we would do it slightly differently. Yeah. And so your job at home as a listener is to hear all these amazing things that Dr. Jaggett here is telling you about and to implement them into your life so you can do things easier, better, faster, and you can make more money. You can achieve the things that you want to do in your life better. So when it comes to credit cards, remember the knife analogy. We don't want you to be afraid to use the knife. We want you to recognize that it's very dangerous and it can hurt you. But if you use it right, it can help you do all of the things that you want to do in life. And the other important thing is that don't beat yourself up. If you get yourself into a bad situation, know that one, maybe you messed up, maybe you made some bad choices, sure, but we're not perfect. None of us are, right? So don't beat yourself up over it because you don't really gain that much by beating yourself up. Another thing to recognize is the systems that are set up are not good. They're made to take advantage of you. They're not made to educate you. It's very easy to fall into debt. It's very easy to make these mistakes. And again, that's one of the things we're trying to change and encourage to fix the system. But until that happens, you always got to know what system you're living in and how you can best safely navigate it. And that's what Helpful for Life is all about. We're helping you guys navigate these things. That's what How to Life is about. So my question that I would ask of you guys at home is, what action are you going to take right after you listen to this around your credit cards? And I'll come up with a couple of options for you that may vary based on your situation. One, which is basically for everyone, go look at this credit card guide, scroll through this, look at the table of contents, see what might interest you, click on it. Because the thing about finances, which is the same about a lot of things in life, some of the most important things people spend the least amount of time on. And finances and credit is something that's going to follow you around for the rest of your life. And so take 30 minutes, half of an hour to learn a little bit about this thing that is going to affect you for the rest of your life.
So be the master of it. Don't be the slave to it. How do we find this guide, Reid?
Yes. So you can go to helpfulforlife.com/resources. Right at the top, you'll see it. Swipe right, the comprehensive guide to getting the most out of credit cards. And that's how you get the guide. You'll click the button there. And then below that, you'll see all the calculators we're talking about, which will help you to pay off multiple credit cards, which will help you to pay off a single credit card, to help you figure out how much money, what percentage a credit card sign-up bonus can get you. It'll tell you all about the credit card rewards based off of different categories so you can maximize your credit card rewards. It'll tell you the value of a credit card point so you can know, oh, should I pay for this with points or should I pay for it with my card? Because that's the thing, especially when it comes to flights, which for me is the main thing I like to book with points. It's like, you know what? It's not actually worth it because the value of this point is only half of a cent. Whereas realistically, I can get 1.5 cents or 2 cents if I spend it some other way. But that being said, there are a lot of people who don't ever spend their points. And if you don't ever spend your points, they don't have any value for you. So make sure you spend your points. And then another one is a credit card balance transfer. So your situation where you came in, you guys were using the balance transfer as a way to move the ball down the road. You didn't want to pay for it now. So just kick it down the road, kick it down the road, kick it down the road. And that can be a very bad thing. And so if that's what you're doing with your credit card balance transfer, I would strongly encourage you to reconsider. That being said, you can use credit card balance transfers as a tool to help you out. Yeah. And one of the big tools is, say I have debt in multiple areas where I'm being charged some really high rate, 25% or something like that. Well, if I do a balance transfer and then I can get a lower percentage, well, I can, one, consolidate my debt to get a lower percentage. And two, sometimes there's even offers like, oh, you got a special 0% for a year or something like that. And this is another place they get you. They give you these promotional offers that only last for a year. But guess what? If you're aware of these things, if you set it, you put it in your calendar, you make yourself reminders and you're checking in to make sure you're following your systems, then you can set future self up for success. So that's some of the stuff you can find on our website, helpfulforlife.com/resources. And of course, hit the contact us button in the top right and let us know if you guys have any questions. We'd be glad to answer them.
This is awesome, Reid. Thank you very, very much. Guys, go to Helpful for Life. Reid is awesome. As you can tell, he has so much information and he's here to help. I'm here to help. So ask us. We want to help you.
Yes. The bottom line is don't ever feel dumb and don't ever feel bad. There are many people out there who are in worse situations than you and who have made bigger mistakes than you. I just had one of my friends last week tell me, and he's a guy I've been around every week for a long time. He just told me, hey, I just got my first credit card. I'm like, bro, how long have we known each other? I have a whole guide on credit cards. Why do you not have a credit card yet? How did you not know this?
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's not a big deal. And guess what? He's been living life just fine. Life will get a little easier as he gets better credit and as he can do other things, but it's not a big deal. It's okay if you start quote unquote late, but the earlier you start and the better you set yourself up for success, the easier everything else becomes.
Absolutely. Reid, thanks very much for talking about this. I really appreciate you. And it was great to see you again.
Yes, great to see you as well. Thanks for having me.
That was a really important and helpful talk. Many of you have expressed that you wished you had learned about credit and credit cards long before you got into debt. To get Reid's comprehensive guide to getting the most out of your credit card use, go to helpfulforlife.com/resources. I have some other shows about money and finances to help you out, so I'm going to list them right here. In episode 10, you can learn about the actual definitions of money terms and how they apply in your life. That episode is called Money Smarts. Episode 6 is all about credit and credit repair. Do you want to learn how to make a budget and get out of debt? Listen to episode 18. Jason Hoschauer, a financial coach, was once $77,000 in debt, and he got himself out. He shares that story and teaches how you can do it too, and more importantly, how you can avoid that. On the opposite end of the spectrum, in episode 7, Randy Levenbaum talks about how she put a very deliberate plan in place at age 20 and ended up retiring at age 43 on a very modest income. That is a super inspiring episode. I recommend you listen to that one for sure. And for those who want to start leveraging their money now, episode 40 is about how to utilize a 401k through your job. And episode 41 is called the No Fear Guide to Investing. And I'm going to mention this one too. Episode 55 is about real estate investing with the W2 capitalist, Jay Helms. All of these links and the links for Reid Garcia and Helpful for Life will be in the show notes at howtolife.com/099. So I'm still kind of reeling about the fact that this is the 99th podcast episode. There have been some really good topics and some wonderful pros to offer advice and encouragement so far. If you love this show and you've been enjoying this podcast, I would appreciate it so much if you would leave a 5-star rating on your podcast player. If you want to take it one step further and leave a nice review, I would truly appreciate that. All the content I put out for How to Life, all the podcast episodes, all the YouTube mominars can be found on my website. And you can also contact me there as well at howtolife.com. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your time by tuning in today. I will be back next week with my milestone episode 100, which is going to be featuring you. I have polled you, the audience, and have asked your questions, your opinions, your input on adulting and adulting problems and issues that you may have faced or have overcome. And I'm going to be featuring all of that next week. So bye for now. Have a wonderful week and don't worry about anything. There's a lot of resources out there to help you. All you have to do is be open to receive them. You're doing just fine. Really. No worries. You got this.